Just to give an overview, but in terms of signposting, I'm very happy to help in collaboration, any signposting, but on the other hand, you've got some very senior people. So Steph and Sandra are on our panels, my panel, but I've been around the track for lots of grant-giving bodies. So I was on the uni for a while, on the MRC for a while, so I've got a fair feeling for what works. But it's a changing landscape, so the landscape I'm presenting to you is probably changing as I talk and will change in the future. My background is as a GP for 20 odd years in different settings, and I'm now Director of the Programme Board at NIHR. So this is really so that, and I'm sure all of the funding streams in NIHR, this collaboration will be able to take advantage of, to be honest. It's unfortunately is the post-tea pre-supper slot, so you will pitch forward into unconsciousness any time now. Always worth pushing the buttons for NIHR, health and wealth. Now wealth can be broadly defined in terms that if you have a more healthy population, then more likely to be productive. So a lot of the research I do doesn't involve commercialisation, but it's the whole impact of health research, and the more buttons you can press, the more likely you are to get through the scheme. Now, most of you will have senior investigators will have seen the targets. This the central target for the NIHR research system. I can't possibly talk about all the bits, but a lot of the other bits, for example, the faculty and the trainees, I'm sure you'll be involved in putting fellowship applications in. Schools I won't talk about, but I will be happy to at a future date. So I was going to talk about the research programme, which will be, I'm sure, your main target for funding. And the programmes are I4I, EME, RFPD, Programme Grants, Health Technology Assessment, Public Health Research, Health Services and Group Research. And I would have thought you'd be able to apply for all of those programmes potentially with this collaboration. Just to put that in context, I know you can't see this, but one of the fantastic things about the NIHR in the last sort of 8 years, or whatever it's been, has been the idea that any idea should be fundable. Now that's not quite true. Some ideas are more difficult to fund. For example, applied equity is a little bit more difficult to fund, I think. But we sneak it into programme grants, and it comes in other bits too. So you have everything from the basic research, which is from the MRC, starting off with the EME, efficacy mechanisms of evaluation, invention for innovation. Then all of this is NIHR. You might say, well, why is efficacy and mechanism not NIHR? Well, it is to some extent. It's MRC funded, NIHR run, but with some funds from NIHR as well. And then right down through a whole raft of funding opportunities, clerks, and obviously I think you had a talk about clerks this morning, or mentioned clerks this morning. So a huge opportunity. I mean, taking this back 10 years, personally, I was thinking of giving up research because you couldn't get funding for the sort of stuff that I like doing, which is highly applied, and the NIHR has transformed that. So long as the economic climate holds out and we have a sympathetic chancellor the next time, the funding situation is still the envy of the world, I'm afraid. Well, it's not afraid, it's just fantastic. So make hay while the sun is out. Right. So I4I, so this is prototype commercial development. The funding stream guides progression of prototypes, gives you business advice. You need 2 organisations to apply across HR and industry. 2-stage application process. Not a huge amount, but for example, in respiratory area, low-cost optical sensor for asthma monitoring has been funded. I don't know whether the Swansea group are here today, but anyway, they've managed to get some funding. And again, there will be opportunities for you in I4I, but it's a relatively small funding stream. EME, MRC funded, administered by NIHR, and the emphasis on EME, certainly when I was on the board, was efficacy. You had to basically, once you've got proof of concept in man, you're then talking about phase 2 or phase 3A studies, and that's what they want you to show, but they quite like you having some mechanism as well. Now they may have changed that, they may look for purely mechanistic studies now, but certainly that was while I was on the board a couple of years ago. And I'll just give you this example. That's my own EME award. It's not just trials. This was a randomised feasibility study, but we also explored some of the mechanism, or were able to explore some of the mechanism. So don't just think it's got to be a trial for EME. There are other things that they'll fund. Health Services and Delivery, HS&DR. This was a merger of the former SDO and Health Services. So this is highly downstream, but very applicable to a lot of the work you're doing. Quality, accessibility and organisation of health services, and improved delivery of services, either primary research or evidence synthesis. And so you'll have everything from trials to assessing the models of delivery of care that are already happening, a whole range of things that they fund. So it's worth looking at the sort of grants they fund, but a huge range there. Public health research, well, the essential thing here is non-NHS interventions. But again, this is probably the least of the areas that you might be addressing, but I guess you might be thinking of some kind of public health interventions to that are relevant for asthma, or at least investigating public health aspects, but probably of less interest to you, I guess. So there's another example there. Uptake of smoking, respiratory area. Smoking master. Research patient benefit program. This is England nominally, but so is the program grant England nominally. But since you've managed to get a program development grant and a program grant, and I'm doing the same with collaborators in not just England, you can get the money, but you just have to have the main applicant who is here. RFPB may be more sticky about this than program grants, but program grants are quite permissive. So even though this is England and program grants are England, you still can get the money. And the sort of things, they're rather smaller awards, 350k, you can do some trials for that, but often it's development and feasibility work. But again, a whole range of things that they will fund, but at smaller stage, smaller scale. HTA, I think most of you will know about these. These are effectiveness trials, as opposed to EMI, which is efficacy. So EMI are tightly controlled studies by and large, and these are much more at the effectiveness end of the spectrum, so very much in the area that you're looking at. But health technology is defined fairly widely. I don't quite know why they call it health technology. So it can be drugs, devices, procedures, settings of care, screening, a whole range of things. And the examples are sort of legion, but several of your senior investigators obviously have HTA trials, but they do trials in all kinds of areas. They can do parallel, step wedge, you name it. HTA are pretty broad and not well. Program grants, this is my board. And I would imagine you'd be in a prime position to put in several program grants, to be honest, in this area. So the key things are, it's a whole series of related projects with a coherent theme with patient benefit of the order of 3 to 5 years. That is a very strong thing. You have to be able to convincingly show that you're going to make a difference. It's very downstream. There is now no upper limit. I've underlined it because that's recently changed. I'm relatively new in the directorship, under 2 years. So basically $500,000 a year. You could go for longer than 5 years, but the average expectation is 5 years, so about 2.5. As I said, NHS organisations in England for this one, but you can get around that. 2 funding rounds a year, 2-stage process, and the panels, the thing to note about the panels is that they are generalist and methodological. So if you get through stage 1, you will then not only have a detailed content refereeing for stage 2, but you'll also get detailed methodological review. So what you want to do at stage 1 is to put in a very detailed application so that you can get detailed feedback, so you have a good chance of getting the stage 2 through. So make it very detailed. There is continuity of the panel, so that we're trying to make it fair on applicants. So if stage 1 panel says we don't like this and we do like that, unless you've got a very, very, very good reason, you need to fit in with what they say, because it's going back to the same people. And an example in the respiratory area is Alistair Hayes, but you've also got, as you know, you've got a program development grant with a view to a subsequent program in this collaboration. This is just grantsmanship, really. Why things go down. Insufficient rationale, idea or methods, insufficient methodological detail, gaps in the expertise of the research team. Failure to address feedback is probably one of the commonest things. Program too ambitious or too upstream. This is highly downstream. You know, you've got to show benefit within 3 to 5 years. or it's not really a program, it's not really coherent, it could have been done in 5 separate studies. They don't really have anything to show. Program development grant, well, this group already knows about that, but the key thing about program development, it's up to 100k, but it's amazing what you can do for 100k. It's spotting the gaps in your future program that you can't do your future program now, but you need to articulate a future program exceptionally well, otherwise the whole thing will go down. I think program development grants are actually rather difficult to get because you've got to articulate a really clear full program with all the methods, and you've got to be really clear about the gaps and how you're going to do them. But you've done it, you've got that, so you know about that. This was from my immediate boss, who this is his overview of how things go and don't go. So NIHR is brilliant. The whole spectrum of research, from basic research to highly applied. So identify an appropriate funding scheme. If you get it wrong, it doesn't matter so much because you'll be signposted to the right so it's not a killer, but you know, if you're speak to the panel staff, so then know your target and how the board works. So you need to know in my board that it's a generalist panel and you've got to make the general arguments as well as making the content-specific arguments. Following guidance closely. Strength of your team is going to be crucial. You can't get a program grant without high-level methodologists addressing the various aspects of methodology, help you come stats, behavioural work. Answer the questions that you're given from the panel and politely, because appropriate PI is not just a tick box these days. It probably started off as such. I mean, it's a philosophical stance of NIHR, but it has to be good these days. Something won't go down alone on PPI, but it will be one of the things that now sends it down. And very well written. I mean, I'm guilty of this. You know, you're so into reading it, you don't see the gaps. Now, you've got a big enough team that you can just send it to somebody and say, look, can you just read this with a fresh pair of eyes? But I always find the RDS a fantastic help there, because they don't know the area, they're a fresh pair of eyes, and they have a range of methodologies usually. So, but you may not need that bit of advice because you've got such a big team. I think you probably have enough. I'm not sure you can quite get this yet, but anyway, I think that's it. I'm not sure if time for questions or whether you want questions. It's about time, actually, isn't it?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
A couple of questions if you've got.
You have the expertise in this group to be able to apply for any of these grants. I mean, you've got a fantastic team, so you don't need my advice about it, but you've certainly got it. Steve?
Hello. Oh, just the quick one is actually just a general comment. The boom I'm hearing that it is going to get tighter for the environment this year.
I don't know where you could have possibly heard that from.
Yeah.
But it probably, what we don't know, there's going to be election. We don't know whether the new government is going to be quite as friendly as the existing government and previous governments have been towards research. Sally Davies has done an amazing job. You might have all sorts of issues about her, but she's done fantastically politically in protecting our funding. But it is a bit difficult when everything else is creaking under cuts, or if not real cuts, in effect cuts, for us to maintain our funding. So it is, I can't imagine it's not going to get a bit tougher, to be honest. At the moment we fund purely on quality, so trying to get things through and funding is the priority. But we will shortly be going to an environment, I'm sure, at some stage in a year or so, where it'll have to be ranked like it used to be when I sat on the MRC board, and things that fall below the cut aren't going to make it even though they're good. At the moment, everything that we want to fund that's good gets funded. There are lots of good things that don't get funded because peer review is not a perfect process, but it probably will get more difficult. But it might not. You know, the economic climate seems to be improving a little bit, doesn't it? And the new government may be friendly, and Sally may stay in post. That's our best hope, really. She wants to stay in post. She must be the only time. She's been absolutely amazing at managing to persuade the politicians that the funding should be continued. And we've never had it so good. There's no other country that has it this good, I think. Even the States.
I've got one question. Can you comment about we talked about peer review. Do you think the respiratory community is harsher on their own submissions than other communities?
No, I don't think so. I think as a general rule, that what you tend to find is you get content referees who say, great idea, it goes down on the methodology. Not always. Sometimes the content referees say, hopeless idea. But generally, people in the field will be pursuing an idea that the community out there thinks is reasonably good. And the methodology just isn't up to it. There's one of those common pitfalls, one or several of the common pitfalls, and it goes down one of those usually. It's usually not the community that sends it down. If we get into a really, really tight, what used to happen, and we may get back to that at some stage, is that people would sink things because they thought, well, if they get it, that's going to be less money for me and my group. Now, I haven't seen that personally in a while, but we may be going back to that. But I hope not. I'm an optimist. I think it's still going to be good for a while.
Okay, well, on that optimistic note, thank you very much.